Everyone to session 2 of Sterling's 2026 Summer Learning Series. I am Laura McNeil. I am absolutely delighted to host this learning series every Wednesday. As you've seen in the video, hopefully you were able to join a little early and watch our video. This series will run at noon through August 26th. And in keeping with previous summer learning series that we've hosted and the cadence that we've created, I will start with a recap of last week's session, which was provided by Roland, no one other than Roland Martinez, and who is the board, by the way, the board chair for the Sterling Council. He gave us an overview of the 4 key competency groupings of leadership, and I'll just recap on what those are. The 4 competency groupings are integrity and character,
Hey,
which
good
is
afternoon,
actually
everybody.
the title for today's session, integrity and character. We'll cover that today. Second one is influence and communication. Third one is change management and adaptability. Fourth one is accountability and crucial conversations. These are the 4 groupings that we're going to be covering throughout the summer learning series. These competencies work together to establish organizational culture through leadership role modeling. We also talked last week about the ethics of justice and the ethics of care. Just to delineate between the two, the ethics of justice is universal, where objective principles apply to all. Ethics of care is really tailored down to the individual and the individual's needs. We also talked about 4 types of conversations: cooperative, one-way, two-way. We talked about competitive being anchored in debate. We also highlighted the fact that influence requires a relational connection. You can't really effectively influence unless there's a relational connection, and that often requires some give and take, creativity, and flexibility. Lastly, we talked about organizational change and how it's essential to every business, and yet organizational change does affect everyone differently. The key takeaway there for organizational change was it does present opportunities to be creative and innovative. It's also an opportunity to motivate others. We concluded last week's session with 3 key takeaways. Leadership should not be viewed as a power. It should be viewed as a responsibility. Leaders are accountable for the outcomes of the entire organization, and that includes the individuals that make up that organization. If there is no leadership system or approach prevalent in an organization, then a culture or a system will evolve to fill that void. That's what we covered last week. This week, as I mentioned earlier, I'm super excited to get into the competency grouping. Our first competency grouping is integrity and character. And having taken a sneak peek at Dr. Lesandrini's presentation, I'm super, super excited. I'm really looking forward to this session. We do have Dr. Jason Lesandrini with us. He is a fellow of the American College of Healthcare. He's the founder of the Ethics Architect, and he is an AVP of Ethics, Advanced Care, and Spiritual Health and Language at Wellstar Hospital Systems. I want to welcome you, Dr. Jason Lesandrini, and like I said, can't wait for you to dig in. So take it away.
Well, thank you very much. Before I share my slides, Laura, thank you. Thank you, Sterling. And Roland made it a competition today already. So he said we had over 200. So if you have any friends or family that you could text at the current moment, please share the link below. We need to make sure we get that number above what Roland. What did you say? 200, Roland? I'm at 199. I just need two more
260.
people to show up for today.
260. My
Oh,
brother from another
260. The numbers
260.
changed.
My
Okay.
brother from another mother, 260. We got to get to
260.
260. So keep going.
Okay.
I know I piqued your achievement motive, but there you go.
Fair enough. Okay, well, I'm gonna wait. It's at 200 right now. I'm optimistic that we'll beat Roland's record going forward today. Thanks, everybody. Again, nice to see you all virtually. Laura, thanks for the nice introduction, Dion, and the whole Sterling group. It's very exciting to be with you today. As Laura said in my bio, I've spent the last couple decades working in healthcare, non-healthcare, public, private, you name it, and a lot of the things that you all have seen me at Sterling talking about is really about ethical leadership. And My keynote talked about purpose this past year. And all these things are sort of intimately entwined. And one thing that I started to think about after I left Sterling, the conference recently was about humility and how we think about that. And so I thought I'd bring some of my thoughts to you all, really about humility and how I think about that work. So, had a recent conversation with a friend, and like any technology, it listens to you. If you don't know that, it listens to you. And it was listening to the complex things that we were talking about whether to share something with a team member, about how to handle a stressful situation. And so I got off the phone. I don't want to say that thing's name right now because I have one in my office and it will kick on. And so I said, hey, turn on Spotify. And Spotify kicked on as a random. And what should come on by coincidence, I don't know what you want to call it, was a song that was called Humble Me. For those of you who know it, it's by an artist named Nora Jones. Was it coincidence? I don't think so. I think these things are all listening to us. Maybe not, but it doesn't matter whether it was coincident or not. So I listened to the song, and in the song, what should come up is a line that just kicked me back. Truth spoken in whispers will tear you apart. Think about that for a second. The truth is out there somewhere. People are saying it, but when a leader can't hear it, can't sit with it, can't even consider it to be right, it doesn't go away, group. It does what it's supposed to do, and it will go behind the scenes, and it will start damaging quietly to the people saying it, to the team that's involved, to the overall culture. And so I think it's worth sitting with that for a second as we think about when I talk about ethical leadership, and I know Roland set this up last week about how we think about the moral manager piece of us, and the moral person piece of us that combine to create ethical leadership. Humility is one of those characteristics that we think about when we think about moral people. And this line really just sat with me. Truth spoke in whispers will tear you apart. That line is the emotional core, I think, of everything I'm going to try and talk through today. But the truth doesn't need to be shouted to actually do damage, as we all know. There are lots of truths that go on in our organization. In fact, even the small, quiet, hard truths wear on people and teams over time when nobody is willing to hear them. And that's what I'm going to try and get at with a little bit of us understanding what humility does and what people need and how that leans into us as an ethical leader. So, Laura and I talked a little preview, and one of the things I got to thinking about was what's the one thing I want these people to leave today and learn about integrity, character, really focusing on humility, but broadly integrity and character. And I think it's this. Even if you don't pay attention to the rest of it, I want you to leave with this sort of saying. It's not intelligence, it's not good intentions, it's actually humility. Humility that separates leaders who lead ethically more often than not than those that don't. That's it. Not intelligence, not good intentions, but humility. It's something we need to really start focusing on. And in fact, there's lots of research that suggests this is the case. In 2013, there was a study that showed and looked at leaders across 8 different sort of industries and settings, and they found that humility, not raw talent, not intelligence, predicted stronger team performance, more learning, lower turnover, higher engagement, yada, 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 yada. Everything that we want to be for our teams and we want our teams to be for the communities they serve can be driven by humility. It's not a consolation prize sitting next to smart, well-intentioned people. In fact, it's the things that actually moves outcomes that the others that we often talk about don't. And so we need to get real clear about what that means, about what it means to actually be a humble leader. I think the worst way to define something is to tell you what it's not. So guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what humility isn't. And so I want us all to just be clear. Humility, it's not low self-esteem. You can be humble and still know exactly what you're worth. It's not self-deprecation, as people often conflate it. It's not about putting yourself down. It's not about saying, oh, is that the right thing? Oh, I need to listen to this person. And it's not always giving in. It's not letting other people win arguments just to keep peace. That's not humility. Funny thing is, that's actually what the research shows. So I tried to connect this back all to data. So there was a 2017 paper that looked at this and said that humility is about how firmly you hold your beliefs, not a referendum on your worth. And conflating those two is, in fact, the most common thing that people do when they talk about humility. That's the challenge they often face. And so here's how I think about humility, and for you to think about humility going forward. Humility is like walking a tightrope, okay? This thing about character, of who you are, on one side sits this thing called arrogance that we often get tempted by. Not Roland, of course, not Roland. That being refusing to see your limitations, willing to acknowledge others, so on and so forth. And then on the other side is being so consumed by your limitations that you get paralyzed. There's so much deference. Well, I don't know, right? It's this balancing act that humility is about knowing what you don't know without being overwhelmed by what you don't know. And interestingly enough, as I started to think about this, of course, those of you who know me, I went out to the literature, I started reading. This is actually what people have studied and found. Intellectual humility is exactly this tightrope idea. It's between what they call intellectual arrogance and intellectual servility on the other. So being so overwhelmed by your limitations that you freeze, or becoming so excessively deferential. And you'll be surprised that team members don't like either one of those sides. They want you to walk the tightrope. Now, walking that tightrope is super hard to do because at the beginning of it, you need to know what you don't know. So think about a time in your normal context, or maybe even outside of a context that's not yours. So if I asked you all to make a decision about healthcare, for those of you who are not on here, if I said to Bob, hey, I need to know what should we do to treat this infection on my finger? Right? I imagine he maybe has had infections himself, but he doesn't work in healthcare. He doesn't know that's gangrene. That's a challenge, right? There are things that we're not going to be in that situation having dealt with before. And the instinct for most leaders, truth be told, research backs this up, is for all of us to fake it till we make it, because that's what we've been told we have to do. And for those of us who don't fake it till we make it, they freeze and often hand the whole thing off to someone else. The challenge is owning that limitation looks different. Bob could just say, I don't have deep experience with this specific situation, and then go find out what we need to know. But somehow, inherent in the way that we think about ourselves as leaders, we get fixated on this always needing to know or always needing to defer versus thinking about that middle ground in practice. Arrogance would have been pretending you know it. Being overwhelmed would have been saying stepping back. Humility is about naming that gap in between close enough so that you can act well when it actually happens. All right. Next, we have not lived in everybody's life. I know we like to think that we've had all these experiences and we like to extrapolate, but that's not the way it works. We need to shift to the internal work of humility, owning what you don't know about yourself. There are things from an interpersonal side that you have not been through. Leaders, some reason, seem to struggle with this. It's one thing to admit that you have gaps in your knowledge. It's another to recognize that someone else's experience is something different than yours. In the literature, we call this cultural humility, but there are lots of other things. And it comes from a paper in the late 90s where they tried to train actually clinicians to learn about cross-cultural care. So yes, in my background, but it applies to every other context. Their point in that paper, rightfully so, is that someone's background changes what a situation means to them. And you may not have lived that life, right? Staying curious about that life isn't the same thing as being uncertain, right? You can hold your own expertise. You can still recognize that you don't automatically understand. And those aren't in conflict. Last but not least, I think, or second to last but not least, before we get to your own assessment and thoughts, is you can still be sure of yourself and be wrong. Lord, please help us. We can be wrong. Can we just admit that as leaders, we have to be able to admit that sometimes we may not know the right answer. You can walk into a room fully convinced of your position and still hold enough humility to say that I could change if someone gives you a good reason to. Roland and I had a conversation at the conference. I didn't necessarily agree with Roland, but at least I walked into the room with the idea that Roland had reasons to believe what he believed, and I had that conversation with him. Now, I think I've been persuaded a lot by what Roland has said, and there are some things that I don't. But the combination of confidence and humility is what makes you worth trusting. Someone who's always uncertain on that other side and deferring all the time is exhausting to work with. So is someone who sits on the other side of being overly confident. The people you want leading you and the people your people want leading them, right? State clear positions, mean it, and stay open to the facts as they shift around them and underneath them. I will tell you, my sense is that a lot of people get this wrong. They think staying quiet, agreeing easily, avoiding pushback, that's humility. But it's not, in fact, actually that. You can be soft spoken and still be intellectually arrogant. You can refuse to actually consider how you might be wrong in those contexts. And you can be loud and assertive. Boy, do I know that one. And still be deeply humble because you're willing to hold your position loosely enough to let it actually move. That's what humility is about. So, it's time, folks, for us to play a game. It wouldn't be Jason if we didn't play a game or we didn't think about ourselves. So I'm going to ask you to check yourself. So in the next minute, I need you to take out your phone and get your phone out, and we're going to have you scan a QR code that's going to pop on the screen. I will not know who you are. Please be very clear. I'm not tracking IP addresses. I don't have names. This will be completely anonymous. What I want you to do is I want you to think quickly. First instinct, based on the question, okay? No overthinking it. I know a lot of us on here will do it. These statements that I'm bringing to you are a combination. It's a scale I've used before, a combination of a bunch of tools on humility, and I'm going to try and get you to actually reflect on your own leadership. So, first one. I tend to get defensive about my intellectual humility. So take your phone out, scan that QR code. It should pop up on your phone. I can get mine and do it with you to make it easier. Um, Uh, and you're to either strongly agree or strongly disagree. Strongly disagree is one. Please note the scoring. Okay. And let me see if I can get it to, yep, here we go. There we go. So right now we've got 46 are disagreeing that I tend to get defensive about my intellectual. All right. We'll give it one more second. All right. That's the first round of questions. Laura, can you see the answers are live populating for you, correct? Just want to make sure that that's correct. Is it populating?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So you can see where you all are sort of self-assessing. About 26% of you say that you agree, 42% disagree, 11% strongly disagree. All right, next. When someone disagrees with ideas that are important to me, it feels as though I'm being attacked. Do you strongly, note the scoring, strongly disagreeing is 1, strongly agree is 5. We'll start to populate. And we're getting lots of variation here. Lots of you are saying disagree. Some of you are saying strongly disagree, 22%. Okay. For sake of time, I'm going to keep moving forward. My ideas are usually better than other people's ideas. There are a few people on this call, I'm not picking Roland in particular, but I think I could answer this question for if they'd like me to do that. All right, so strongly disagree, disagree. Now, what I'll say very quickly as at these, that the first 3 questions are reverse scored, meaning agreeing signals lower humility versus the other, right? You can see that. That should be intuitive as you. So let's transition to the next round. When someone points out a mistake in my thinking, I'm quick to admit that I was wrong. And Laura, I see the time. I'm making sure I'm going to push ahead and make sure we have a little bit at the end. So I'm going to try and do this quickly with them.
Yep, that's fine.
All right. And you can see what's starting to happen here. Look at people are reverse or now flipping the scoring. So one is strongly disagree. You can see five is it's still the same scoring system, but now the answers are lying in agree, strongly agree. I'm quick to admit that I was wrong. All right. Next. Uh, oh, come on. I'm willing to change my position on an important issue in the face of good reasons. You can see the overwhelming majority of coming in faster. You're getting quicker on the phone. You're also feeling a little more confident about your answers, are picking 4 and 5 in this context. Couple more, and we'll move on to the final remarks of the conversation. I can respect others even if I disagree with them in important ways. All right. So I see a little more variation, but most of the folks are picking down in the agree, disagree. All right. And last but not least, as a concluding question, I feel comfortable admitting my intellectual limitations. And we'll see what folks say here. Lots of you agree and don't agree, or agree or strongly agree. Now, in light of all that, here's the real deal. Like every self-assessment I've ever done for Sterling and done with colleagues in the field who might be on this call, we know that self-assessments are only one tool or measurement in our toolbox. And self-assessments are often sometimes very challenging. I have this whole thing about how ethical leadership is going. But here's what I'm seeing, right? People tend to fairly score themselves high on things, right? Oftentimes, oh, I'm quick to admit that I was wrong, but lower on, I feel comfortable admitting my limitations. If that's a little bit what happened here, it's worth sitting with that for a minute or for your own personal gratification. We're probably pretty good at apologizing after the fact, but I think we're often slower, a lot slower in that, in the moment to recognize that we actually don't know something. Okay. Lots of things you don't know. We're not willing to admit oftentimes at the time. And I think that gap isn't actually a fluke. There was a review that actually looked at this type of humility and found that exact pattern that self-reported humility and demonstrated humility don't line up cleanly. People are probably reliably better at rating their own after the fact behavior than they are than in their in the moment behavior. Meaning people being comfortable not knowing what they what they don't know. So what we probably just showed a little bit about ourselves on self-reflection is what I want you to see is that this isn't a trick question. It's just a documented pattern about self-assessments, but also about our own internal states, about how we think about how we show up as leaders. In fact, how we show up as ethical leaders. That's what we need to make sure we're thinking about. So I'm not asking you to continue to go back and take those questions every day, but in the situations where you need to respond to someone where there's a context in which you don't know, how do you reflect after the fact if you chose the right answer or didn't choose the right answer? I think that's worth sitting about. How do I think about whether I can admit my own mistakes, whether I have confidence or am I arrogant? What level of context are you in? And so this is what I'll say. And this is sort of what was in the slide, and then we'll turn it back over to Laura here for a second. To me, it's being humble that we actually say something like this, that ethical leadership doesn't require you to be morally perfect. It just requires you to be honest. Humility requires you to be honest. Doesn't mean being arrogant. It doesn't mean being deferral and uncertain. It doesn't require you to be quiet. It doesn't require you to be loud. It doesn't require anything. What humility requires you to do is to be honest with yourself and to reflect on where am I walking that, or not where, sorry, how am I walking that tightrope between what being extremely overconfident and arrogance or being extremely uh, uh, self-acknowledging of our limitations or whatever we want to sort of classify that as, depending on how you think about that. That's the line today. That's what I hope you take with from this whole presentation is that I'm not asking you to be morally perfect about it. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourselves about how humble you show up in the situations that you're in, because it's required for you to do so. One as a leader, but most important, as an ethical leader. That's it, Laura. I'm done.
Awesome. You did an
Thank you
amazing
all.
job. I really enjoyed the